to the Putting Your Business on the Map podcast. I'm your podcast host, Landon Blake, a land surveyor living and working in Central California. Happy to have you here. Let's go ahead and dive right into today's episode. The title of episode 25 is The Human Element, How to Hire a Diverse Team of Great People for your surveying and mapping business. This is the first episode in a new occasional series we're going to do called The Human Element. It's going to focus on probably the hardest, it's one of the hardest, if not the hardest parts of running a small business, which is the people part. I tell people I spend more time on the people part, I think, than I do on any other part of the business. So it's a huge challenge. Probably the only thing harder than the people part is the part where you're trying to get paid. Those are the two hardest things, I think. So there's my favorite word in the universe, my favorite word whisker. We're going to do an occasional episode on this topic called The Human Element. I don't think we'll do it as regularly as we're doing the series on finding good clients, maybe once a month. So I'll try and sneak an episode in on this series about managing people. We'll try and do that once a month. So this is the first episode in that occasional series. The reason I'm talking about it is Kyle is a listener and a surveyor I know here in California. And he reached out to me and said, hey, I appreciate what you're doing with the podcast. I haven't heard an episode for a while. Here's something I've been thinking about. How do you hire a diverse team? He says, most surveyors struggle to hire people that aren't white men. So I'd be curious to hear what you think about trying to get some diversity in your team. And I thought it was a great question. I think he might have asked me that question. I had made a post on LinkedIn and Facebook about our team here at RH. Our non-salaried folks are hourly folks, so that's everybody but Brian and I, the two owners. 75% of those folks are women, which is fairly unusual for the typical survey company. And so I had made a post about that, and I think that may have been what prompted Kyle to ask me his question. So I was super happy to get the question. It really made me stop and think through that. And I wanted to talk about it for Kyle and others, so we're going to do a whole episode on it. I'm going to tell you a quick story that will get us started. I was going to meet a longtime client of mine. He's a land attorney, and he's a super great guy. He's one of the best clients we have, and he's just a good human being. He's one of the best people I've ever worked with. Hands down. He's in the top 5, maybe the top 3 best guys I know in the business. So he's fantastic. Fantastic human being. And we hadn't seen each other for a while, for a few months, so I shot him a quick text and said, hey, I'd like to come take you to lunch and just find out what's going on in your life and catch up. So he said, yeah, no problem. That would be great. We do that a couple times a year, probably. And I told him, I said, hey, I've got a couple young women on my team that have expressed an interest in learning to do expert witness work. That's the type of work I do for this land attorney. I said, and I'd like to bring them to lunch and introduce you to them and give them an opportunity to ask you a little bit about what you do as a land attorney. I told him I'm trying to get these 2 young women out of the office occasionally to meet clients, and I think they'd be super comfortable with you because you're a good guy. Would you be willing to do that? And he's like, absolutely, I would love that. Bring your young women, bring your 2 workers, and I'd love to have lunch with them and you, and we can talk a little bit about what I do. So I brought them to lunch. It was Nikki and Elena. And so we get to the restaurant and we sit down. we're waiting for the waitress to come over and take our order. And I introduced him to Dan. And Dan was the client. And one of the first things Dan asked, I can't remember if it was Elena or Nikki, but one of the young women, he asked, "Where did you go to university?" And she kind of got quiet because she didn't go to university. And so it was a little bit of an awkward silence. So I stepped in and I said, "Well, actually, she didn't go to university. She was working at a fudge shop and working at the front counter of a fudge shop. But I interviewed her and she had a great personality and was looking for an opportunity to have a career. And so I hired her and we're teaching her to be a surveyor." And so I could tell Dan was probably a little bit embarrassed. He's like, "Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. It's great that you gave her that opportunity. And I'm sure she's going to do great." The reason I told you that story is I think it illustrates a little bit of the problem that we currently have in American business and in the American labor market. And it's described sometimes as a paper ceiling. In other words, you don't get your foot in the door to good opportunities without at least a 4-year college degree. And so when Dan met the two young women that worked for me that were learning to be surveyors and expert witnesses, he just assumed that they were university educated. And neither one of them are university educated. But that was his baseline assumption. And I think a lot of people operate with that mental model, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So one of the things I think has helped us build a more diverse team, and we have a fantastic team, by the way. But one of the things that has helped us build a more diverse team, I think, is a willingness to consider non-traditional candidates, including candidates that don't have a bachelor's degree. Now, I want to put all my cards on the table right now at the top here. I have an associate's degree in land surveying. I did not get a bachelor's degree. I grew up in Montana, and the public education in Montana is not nearly as heavily subsidized by the government as it is in a place like California. And I worked full-time, and I couldn't get, there was almost no financial aid available to me because I worked full-time and I made too much money even though I was trying to go to school full-time. And I just couldn't afford a bachelor's degree. I think I would have considered a bachelor's degree, but I just couldn't afford it. So I got an associate's degree. Some of you may not know this, but I'm actually a high school dropout. So I got my GED when I was 15, I think, and then started community college when I was 19 and got my associate's degree. So I am college educated, but I do not have a 4-year degree. I never went to university. And my partner, Brian, does have a bachelor's degree. He has a bachelor's degree in business. But I think we only have one other. I take that back. We have 2 other people with bachelor's degrees, and they both have been hired in the last 30 days. So if you go back more than a month, Brian was the only person at our, let's call it 12-person company with a bachelor's degree, which, again, is pretty unusual for land surveying. Now, we could do a whole episode on the role of education in land surveying. I think education is important. I think college education provides a opportunity to get into the profession for a certain type of person. I do think it's overpriced in America right now, and I don't think it certainly doesn't provide the value to me as an employer that I think it should given the price. But we'll talk about that in a different episode. The reason I told you this story is it illustrates. You remember Dan's a rock solid dude. He's like in my list of top 5 good human beings. He just assumed if somebody was going to go to work for me as a land surveyor and handle things like expert witness work that they would have a university degree. And he was a little bit surprised to find out that that wasn't the case. All right, so before we tell you what we're going to talk about, let me just get through a couple disclaimers. We are a very unique business, and I'm a little bit hesitant. I was a little bit hesitant to share kind of our hiring model because it's not going to work for a lot of surveying businesses. If you run a traditional kinds of surveying business, this model may not work well for you. So what do I mean by traditional kind of surveying business? If you're a giant civil survey firm, this probably won't work for you. And if you're running a two-man shop, this probably won't work for you. We're somewhere in the middle, and this model works well for us. But we're unique. We're going to talk about what makes us unique. So you don't just take this recipe and try and apply it to your business. That isn't going to work. Our hiring model is part of our overall innovation stack. There's a great book on that. I'll try and remember to have Carly put it in the show notes. And it's hard to apply just one part of an innovation stack. You need the whole stack usually. And so I think this is part of our, apologize, there's a so. I think this is part of our innovation stack. I really need to do that in that episode on innovation stacks. But I decided to talk about it because Kyle asked me, and I think there are at least parts of this that you can apply even if you don't follow our whole model. I think there are parts of it that you may be able to apply to your business, and it will certainly make you think and ask questions, which has value on its own. So that's the first part, the first disclaimer. The second disclaimer is I'm still working to get better at selecting, interviewing, and screening new hires. I thought I was pretty good at that when I started the business, and I would say it's just been in the last 6 months that I've realized how much room I have to improve. So in the last 6 months, we've really, really made some significant changes to the way we select and hire. And that includes changing our interview format, changing who's included in the interview, changing the interview questions. It's still too early to know if those things are going to make a difference. I think they are. One of the challenges that I have is I keep telling myself that we don't need to grow more. And so I don't spend a lot of time worrying about how to hire people because I think I'm done hiring people. And then inevitably we just get more work from good clients and I have to go hire people. So I probably need to quit telling myself that I'm not going to hire any more people. And I need to just spend some time on nailing this down because I don't know. I keep saying I've got enough people, and then I end up not having enough people. So that's maybe a topic for another episode. And my partner and I, Brian and I, talk about how big is too big, and is there an upper limit to is it 20, is it 25, is it 15? I don't know that we have good answers to that. I know as you get larger as a business, it gets exponentially harder. And, Brian and I want to spend time in the mountains and with our family and our friends and doing the things we love. We don't want to just spend time running a business. Brian and I are not primarily money motivated, so, or even ego motivated. We don't need to run a 100-person company just because we can. So I don't know. I'm not sure, how much bigger we're going to get and what role hiring will play. I do know it's very difficult to tell a good client that you can't take on their project because you don't have enough people, and so that's why we keep having to hire. So I don't know. Maybe think about that some more. But there's your second disclaimer. I'm still working to get better at this, and I think there's a lot of room for me to improve. And I think I may even have a book or two about how to hire, how to get better at hiring people that are a good fit. All right, third disclaimer. I am not a big fan of the DEI movement. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it got overhyped and overdone. Diversity is important. I'm not as much of a fan of equity or equality as I am diversity. I think diversity is important. We're going to talk about why I think that is. But I think merit is more important than equality. I'm a strong believer in meritocracy. I tell people when they come to work at RH that RH is a meritocracy, so we do not reward people based on seniority or if they're related to one of the owners or if they're pretty or if they have the right skin color or if they have the right religion. That's just not how we do things here. So we work very hard to run a meritocracy. Now, it's hard because both the principles are biased, but we've done our best to try and create a transparent system, especially for compensation. And one of the interesting things about our system is we have rules that Brian and I are bound by when it comes to things like compensation and promotions. And we have bound ourselves by those rules, partly in an effort to avoid the kind of favoritism that I think plagues other businesses. So I'm not a huge fan of what a lot of people would call the traditional DEI movement. I am a fan of diversity, but I am a strong proponent of meritocracy. And I'm just going to call it the big elephant in the room. I'm a white American male and a business owner. So I am the type of person that a lot of people believe has had undeserved privilege. I think if you learn very much about my life, you'll realize that is probably not true. However, I recognize that white males have dominated Western society for centuries at the expense of other social groups, and I recognize that. So I am a white male. My partner Brian is a white male. Now, I don't even know if I need to do this, but I will tell you, my parents raised me. They were deeply religious. I'm deeply religious. I'm a Christian. I was raised in a very colorblind way. Now, I grew up in northwestern Montana, which is one of the whitest places you can find in America, without a doubt. So I did not experience a lot of people of color growing up. But my parents raised me to be colorblind and to be blind to a certain extent to social status. We were very poor. We were a poor working class family. The only reason I mention that is just to help you understand that's one of the reasons why I think I value diversity. I was so colorblind as a young man that I married outside of my culture. I moved to Stockton, California, and I married a crazy Mexican woman who I love and adore. But I seriously underestimated the challenges that I was going to have marrying outside of my culture. And I think that was in part because I was raised to be colorblind. And so I just didn't think about it. And now that I'm older and a little more mature, I can look back and say, yes, our marriage, the first 5 years of our marriage was a lot harder because we were trying to understand each other's culture and come across cultural differences. And that was a big deal. And it would have been easier if I had married a Caucasian woman from the Pacific Northwest, almost without a doubt. It would have been easier. Easier doesn't mean happier. I love and adore my wife. I eat great Mexican food. I have a wonderful, huge Hispanic family with lots of nieces and nephews that I love and treasure. And I think marrying into a Hispanic family has made me a more well-rounded person. But it was certainly difficult. So there you go. I am a white, college-educated male and a business owner. I come from very humble beginnings, and my parents raised me to be colorblind, maybe even colorblind to a fault. And that's why diversity is important to me. And Brian, who is also a white, college-educated male and a business owner, is the father of two wonderful young women. And I think that's part of the reason why we probably there's more than one reason why we have a lot of women working for us, but I think part of it is Brian is the father of two girls, and so he was way more open to hiring young women as surveyors than I think a lot of other business partners would have been. And Brian didn't have that problem, which I respect and appreciate. Okay, last disclaimer. I'm working on my word whiskers. Like, so. My favorite one is so. Please be patient with me. You may hear me hesitate or correct myself with those word whiskers. What are we talking about in the episode today? We are going to talk about why I think having a diverse team is important. So why is diversity important? I'm going to give you some definitions, just a few. There's 3 or 4 definitions. We'll tell you why RH needs a unique approach to hiring, and it has everything to do with the way our business is structured, the business model we run. As I mentioned, that's part of our innovation stack. Because we are a very unique survey business, I believe. I shouldn't say unique, I should say special. There may be other survey businesses like us, but because we are special or rare, that drives the need for a unique approach to hiring because we are looking for special people. Because of that, I want to talk a little bit about the limitations of our approach to hiring because there are limitations, and I don't think our approach to hiring is going to work for a lot of surveying businesses. So we'll be honest about what some of those limitations are. If you think our approach to hiring has some benefits that you would like to try and emulate or imitate, we'll talk for a few minutes about how do you hire like us? What are some things you can do to hire like RH hires? I'll try and talk a little bit about why I think the RH hiring model works. and why it works for us, works well. And then finally, we'll talk about, if we have time, who makes a good RH hire. So if you want to come to work at RH, what kind of things are we looking for? It's a little bit different for the field and the office, but there's a lot of overlap there, and we can talk a little bit about that if we have time. So that's the outline. So there's a just to review again, why is diversity important? Cover some definitions. Talk about why we need a unique approach to hiring. Talk about the limitations of our approach. Talk about why I think our hiring model works. Talk about how you can hire like RH if you want to, and then talk about what kind of people would be a good team member here. All right, with that out of the way, we're going to take a quick 30-second, 60-second break, hear from our sponsor for this episode, and then we'll dive back into the main part of the episode. We're going to talk about why I think diversity is important. Or civil engineering data in a GIS. Do you work for a small organization or utility company? Have people told you that there isn't a way to get started with GIS for your data unless you have a $3 million budget and a dedicated ArcGIS server in your basement? That just isn't true. You can get started with GIS for a few $1,000s using QGIS and the expert consulting advice from the team at Redefine Horizons. We've been using open source software like QGIS to manage land surveying and civil engineering data for over 20 years. Call us to see just how easy it is to start. We can help you do an initial GIS needs assessment for your organization and introduce you to QGIS on the desktop for no charge. You can find our team on the web at www.rh-survey.com. Appreciate RH being our sponsor for this episode. We're going to kick back into the main part of the episode here, or start the main part of the episode. We're going to begin that main part of the episode with that first point in the outline, which is why is this important? Why is diversity important? If you're running a small survey business, why might you want to think about this? And throughout the podcast episode today, when I say business, I want you to think of, that could include a government agency or a nonprofit. So if you're running a survey team, if you're running a survey team at those types of organizations, I think this also applies. So when you hear business, just think organization. Why do you want to think about diversity as the leader of a survey organization? I think that the reason why is there's benefits to diversity and there's dangers to homogeneity, which means everybody basically is the same. So let me talk about what I think some of the benefits of diversity are. And I want to, before I get into that list of benefits, I just want to make a side note here. And I talked about this in the beginning of the episode. I'm not a big fan of the traditional DEI movement. I think it got overblown. I think the pendulum might have swung a little too far there. The reason I am a proponent of diversity in your team for your business is because I think it has real benefits, not just for the human beings that work for you, but there's also real tangible business benefits to a diverse team. And when I say business benefits, like business benefits equals dollars. So this diversity makes good business sense. You don't have to be a proponent of diversity as a small business owner for some social justice reason necessarily. It's okay if you want to do it for social justice reasons, but even if you don't care anything about social justice, it makes good business sense. And so my benefits here, the benefits I'm going to give you of diversity are all related to the business benefits. It has nothing to do with, are we trying to make the world a better place? And I think it's great. If you're a small business owner and you try and make the world a better place, that's what Brian and I try and do to some limited extent. But we also know that we have to make a profit. So here's the business benefits of diversity, in my opinion. Number one, you avoid groupthink. Now, that may not be as important if you're mowing lawns or making tacos, but it's really important when you're a professional consultant and you're trying to help clients solve complicated problems. I'm not saying that groupthink isn't dangerous in other types of businesses, simple businesses, but when you're selling expert advice and trying to solve hard problems, groupthink can be really dangerous. So business benefit of diversity is you avoid groupthink. Number 2, you find innovative solutions to problems. I'm regularly surprised at how my young and somewhat inexperienced team members will put their heads together and come up with solutions to problems that I did not think of. It is deeply rewarding, and I'm sure my partner Brian sees it as well. Number 3, you broaden your appeal to non-traditional hires. As you hire more non-traditional hires, it becomes easier to hire other non-traditional hires. It takes a pretty brave young woman, for example, to walk into a survey business that employs 15 white men and to be the first young woman on that team. I'm not saying there aren't young women that will do that. There are. It takes a special type of person. It takes a certain type of courage to do that. So as your team becomes more diverse, it's a virtuous cycle. It then becomes easier to attract more non-traditional candidates and increase your diversity. So that's another business benefit. A 4th business benefit is you're going to find people that are a great fit for roles that your traditional hires don't excel in. For example, now this is just a general rule of thumb, but I find that the young women we hire tend to be really good drafters and mappers. They just are meticulous. They pay attention to detail. They take incredibly detailed notes. They just tend to be a little more neat and tidy. Now, it's just a general rule. I have a young man working for me who is an excellent drafter, and he pays attention to detail and he does good work. I think he's an exception to the rule. Your typical 22-year-old boy, 22-year-old young man that I hire, like meticulous, neat, and tidy, and paying attention to detail, that's not common character traits I find in that particular part of the labor pool. Just being honest. So when you hire non-traditional folks, you will find there are roles in your organization that they're going to excel at that you probably wouldn't do a good job at if you only hired the kind of traditional survey candidate. Benefit number 5, if you study ecology and the natural world, I believe you find that nature rewards diversity. So to some extent, there is an advantage to, like, for example, a diverse ecosystem. That's why you don't want to plant all the same kind of crops, right? That homogeneity can be dangerous. It makes, for example, in agriculture, it makes you more vulnerable to pestilence or disease. So I think the same thing applies in business. A more diverse team is going to be more resilient, and I think you are going to be rewarded for that diversity in the marketplace. On the other hand, now, there are some dangers to homogeneity when everybody looks the same. What are the dangers of homogeneity? If you have a homogeneous team, you're going to look the same, act the same, and think the same. That's groupthink. That's dangerous for the reasons we talked about. You're going to solve problems the same way. It's going to make it harder to innovate. It's going to make it harder to come up with creative solutions to your clients' problems. And you're going to suck at the same type of tasks. If you only hire 20-year-old young men that like being outside, you're probably not going to do great at the other parts of your business that you need to do a good job at. So that's kind of the flip side of the coin. That's the dangers of being too homogeneous. So I want to give you 3 or 4 definitions here before we get into the next part of the episode. So I'm going to define 4 terms: traditionals, non-traditionals, diverse, and homogeneous. So when you hear me say traditionals now in the rest of the podcast, what I'm really talking about is the typical type of person hired to work for a land surveying business. So what does that typical person look like? That typical person is white or light-skinned, college educated and working in the office, or blue collar and working in the field. That's the typical way that gets separated. Almost exclusively male in the field and in leadership roles. 90% maybe. It's way past the 50% mark. The traditional survey hire tends to be good with technology. They tend to like the outdoors. They tend to be good at math. Not always great at soft skills, and not always meticulous and great at attention to detail. And then there's another part, and that this is part, I think, of just the culture of a lot of surveying businesses. But it also is driven by the fact that most people working at surveying businesses are white and male. But if you're not careful, the culture of your survey business can tend to be rude and crude. And I've seen that at multiple places I've worked. It's not a warm and welcoming and safe environment for women, especially for young women. I've worked at survey businesses where people talk in very disparaging terms about women's physical appearance, where pornography is regularly circulated on company computers and email and phones, where people are regularly pretty vulgar. That's not a good place to work. That's not appropriate for the modern workplace. And that is part, I think, of the kind of the traditional hire. One of the things you've heard me maybe say before on the podcast is, if you've got a guy working for you, he's a 40-year-old or 50-year-old crusty party chief, and he thinks it's okay to, smack your young administrative assistant on her butt when he walks into the office in the morning, you have a huge problem. And I've worked at places like that where that kind of behavior was tolerated and acceptable, and it's certainly not something we tolerate here. So that's what I mean by traditional. When you hear me say non-traditional or non-traditionals, hiring non-traditionals, that means people that don't look like you, guys. That means likely female, likely person of color, good at soft skills, works well with people, neat, clean, polite. Not your typical crusty party chief. So that's what I mean by non-traditional. That doesn't mean it has to be all of those things, but check some of those boxes. If you can check 2 of those 4 boxes, female, person of color, good at soft skills, neat, clean, and polite, you probably have a non-traditional hire, and that's what I mean when I talk about non-traditionals. All right, what about diverse? When you hear me talk about diversity or being a diverse team, what do I mean? That's a balanced mix of people from different cultures, backgrounds, education levels, income levels, and social status. When you hear me talk about being homogeneous or homogeneity, that's a group of people that look, act, and think the same way. That's what most surveying businesses are like. There you go. There's the definitions, 4 of them. Traditional, non-traditional, diverse, and homogeneous. Now we've got some common terms we can use to facilitate the rest of this conversation. The next main point in the outline was why we need a unique approach to hiring here at RH. We do not hire like the traditional survey firm. I've never worked at a surveying or engineering company that hires the way we do. It's very non-traditional. So I want to talk about that. So why do we need that? Why do we need that unique hiring approach? So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 reasons why. So I'm gonna briefly run through those, and then we'll review at the end. So the first reason we need a unique hiring approach is there are problems with hiring traditionals. So you have what I call the 4-year degree problem, and then you have what I call the wood pounder problem. So what's the 4-year degree problem? The 4-year degree problem is generally, it can be summed up in this way. I find a lot of candidates with 4-year degrees want to make too much money for their skill set. They've overpaid for their credential, and they don't really bring me the value I need as an employer for the wage that they want. They also tend to be somewhat entitled and unwilling to get their hands dirty. A lot of times they think they know more than they do, so there's a certain amount of arrogance there. and I'm speaking in general terms here. There are always exceptions. I just hired 2 people with bachelor's degrees that are nothing like this, but I'm speaking in general terms. So that's what I call the 4-year degree program. Every year there are a bunch of survey companies in California that go to the CSUF, California State University Fresno conference, and fight each other to the death in an arena for half a dozen or a dozen young people coming out of that 4-year degree surveying program, 4-year surveying degree program. I don't think it's a good business decision. Way too much competition for way too few graduates. The universities are not doing a good job preparing those young people for the real workplace, in my opinion. What I do think you get with a 4-year degree, and I don't want to get totally sidetracked on that, is you do get some good conceptual knowledge. But I really question the value for the cost outside of that, some of that core conceptual knowledge that you're going to get. So that's what I call the 4-year degree problem. The opposite problem is what I call the wood pounder problem, and that's these folks that survey companies hire that they're just muscle. They show up, they work in the field usually, and all they know how to do is pound wood in the ground. So they're working for a company that does a lot of construction surveying. Typically, they know how to pound wood in the ground. They don't typically have good social skills or computer skills. They can barely run a GPS rover. They don't understand the reason they do what they do in the field. They don't know how to process and adjust and evaluate their data in the office. They don't understand the legal principles of boundary surveying. They don't know CAD many times, or they have very limited CAD mapping skills. That's what I call the wood pounder problem. Neither one of those types of job candidates is going to do well at my shop. So that's one reason why we need a unique approach to hiring. The second reason is because we operate in the middle of the price range for consulting services. So we are not as cheap as a 2-person or 4 or 5-person survey shop that mostly does fence surveys, lot surveys. I'm 3 to 4 times as expensive as a general rule. But we are also considerably less expensive than a large civil survey firm, say out of the California Bay Area or a major metro region like Sacramento, especially if they're union. We are probably half that cost. So we're somewhere, in the middle to upper middle part of the price range for consulting services for surveyors. What that means is we have to work really hard to provide good value to small clients. Most of our clients are small. We're not building stadiums, and we can't compete for overpriced credentials. That's why we don't engage in the annual bidding war for CSUF grads. Part of that's driven by our business model. The third reason we need a unique approach to hiring is we do hard stuff that other surveyors can't do or won't do. So I tell people when I interview them, you have to come to work here with your brain plugged in. You can't be on autopilot. I'm not just looking for wood pounders. We need people that have a strong desire to learn, because we're going to teach you stuff that you can't learn in college and that you probably won't learn at other surveying companies. Almost certainly things like how to read a GLO township plat, how to brief a court case, how to understand zoning regulations, what CEQA is and how it impacts land development, how to run a least squares adjustment properly. A lot of those things you do not learn at other surveying companies. So you have to have a strong desire to learn. And because we are always pushing people out of their comfort zone and pushing them to reach their full potential, we need people that can handle a certain amount of struggle, and they have to have the ability to make and admit mistakes, small mistakes. A lot of people can't handle that. I've had a conversation in the last few months. I've got a young man that works for me. He's a good worker. He works super hard. He's one of the hardest workers we've got on the team. But he likes being outside. He doesn't like the computer as much. And I keep telling him, I know you don't like it. I know you don't like being on the computer. I know you don't like being in books. I don't care. I don't care that you don't like it. You have to learn this stuff if you want to work here. I am not going to have a wood pounder. I am not going to have a guy working for me that only knows how to run the field equipment. You have to learn this other stuff. And I've been telling him, like, if you don't get on a path to learn these other critical skills, you are not going to have a job here. I will not have a field-only surveyor working in my shop. I won't do it. So he's going to struggle to learn that other stuff because it's not in his nature. And I understand that, and we will help him. He can't not do it because he doesn't want to struggle. I had another young woman I hired. She is a fantastic worker. She's one of my best workers. She might be in my top 3. And we told her, you need to go get your UAV pilot certification. And she took the test the first time and failed it. And she's like, I don't test well, and I don't want to do this. This is hard. I don't want to do it. And I'm embarrassed that I failed. And I was like, I'm sorry that you failed. Study, take the test again in 4 weeks. And I'm sorry this is hard. I'm sorry that you're struggling. But part of working here is going through that struggle. Like if you can't handle the occasional struggle to acquire new skills and get out of your comfort zone, you are not going to make it here as a team member at RH. Not everybody some people just want to go to work and be on autopilot. I have fired a couple people for that. They did not want the struggle. They just wanted it. They wanted an easy job. I don't have that. If you want that job, you can go work fast food or retail or be stacking boxes on a pallet in a warehouse. I don't have that kind of job here. So we do hard stuff. I tell my people all the time, if it was easy, we wouldn't get paid to do it. Everything we do at RH is hard. Everything. Like, we don't do fence surveys. We don't do elevation certificates. We don't do leveling. We don't do bare bones topos. We don't do half-baked Alta surveys. Like, everything this team gets paid to do is difficult. And so I need people that are prepared for that. The other reason we need a unique hiring model here at RH is because we have to work in parallel. That's the way our business model is set up. So we have amazing turnaround times for our clients. We regularly turn around complex mid-sized projects in 5 to 10 or 15 working days. What that means is we have to be able to work in parallel. We will roll up to the parcel on an Alta survey with 6 people, and we will bust out a 60 acre or 160 acre 4 parcel Alta survey. We will bust that fieldwork out in 2 days, or 1 day or 2 days with 6 people. At the same time, we've got 3 or 4 people that might be working on the same Alta survey in the office. So I need people that can work in parallel. What that means is I need people that are good team players. I need people that are humble and willing to do any task that's required to get that job across the finish line before the deadline. And because we need those kinds of folks, we don't provide people with ostentatious or elaborate job titles, and we don't have a rigid hierarchy here. And I'm sometimes surprised at how many people crave that. They crave a 32-word job title, and they crave a rigid they want an org chart, and they want to know who's above and below them in the org chart. And if you're that kind of person, you're just not going to do well on our team here. And then another reason we need a unique approach to hiring is because we run this lead from the front leadership style. I talked about that in another episode. I'll try and have Carly link to it in the show notes. That means you got to be willing to sweat, bleed, and get your hands dirty. That mostly constrains my ability to hire at the top of the org chart, because a lot of experienced surveyors, especially licensed surveyors, think because they're licensed they should be able to sit in an air-conditioned office for 6 hours a day and chit-chat with their admin and not do real work, and we don't run that model here. So that's another reason why we need a unique approach to hiring. And then the final reason is, we're a small business that's trying to develop a fairly unique business model. I don't want to overstate that. I'd like to tell you that we're blazing trails. That might be a little bit arrogant. That might be a little bit of an overreach, but I do think we are running a very special survey company that is not like most survey companies. And so because of that, if you come to work here, you got to have a high tolerance for risk. When I interview people, I say, hey, look, if you're married with 4 kids, you need 6 people on the health insurance, you have a boat payment and an RV payment and a $3,500 a month mortgage payment for your 5-bedroom house, we're probably not a good fit. We probably do not have the right risk profile for you. Now, having said that, I think a lot of bigger companies aren't honest with people about the real risk they have in their own job security. But we are certainly we're a small business, and we are a riskier place to work. We don't have $1 million in the bank. I wish we did, but we don't. So we need people that are at a place in their life where they can tolerate a little more of that risk. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We're going to hear from our sponsor, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about some of the limitations to the hiring model that we have here at RH. Google Earth is a great tool. It is the software that brought the power of geospatial data to the masses. A lot of land surveyors use Google Earth to manage their data. However, your organization can quickly outgrow Google Earth for survey data management. Is there a better way? Yes, you can use QGIS and open source desktop GIS to manage your organization's land surveying and civil engineering data. The team at Redefine Horizons can help you do that. They've got decades of experience managing land surveying and civil engineering data using open source GIS tools. The best part is this doesn't need to cost $1 million. It is very easy and inexpensive for your organization to get started with QGIS. As a bonus, QGIS can import and export the KML files used in Google Earth. That means you can still use Google Earth when it makes sense. Check out Redefine Horizons on the web at www.rh-survey.com and let us know how we can help get you started with QGIS. There's no charge for your initial consultation. Thanks again to RH for being our sponsor. If you guys are listening to the podcast and you want to get started with QGIS, it's a great open source program. Reach out to my team at RH. We can help you do that. We use it here every day to manage our big survey projects, and it's a really awesome open source tool. So reach out to us. We got folks that can help you do that if you're interested. I want to talk now about the limitations of the RH approach to hiring, because I want to be honest with you. There are some limitations, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, you got to be careful about trying to pull our hiring model out of our innovation stack and applying it to your business, because it's part of a related stack. So I want to be honest with you about some of the limitations to this hiring model, because like all things in business, there are trade-offs. So I've got three limitations. The first one, number one, a small portion of the overall labor pool is going to be a good fit for us. That means it's more work to find good hires. I didn't fully understand that when I started the business 5 years ago. Now I understand you really need to be a special kind of person to work here. So there's a little bit of a you can imagine like one of the old scales. And so there's a little bit of a balancing act here, I think. You got to be a special kind of person to work at RH. And you got to be humble, hardworking, willing to learn, the type of person that doesn't crave hierarchy and status. That's a small subset of humanity, folks. Those are, at the end of the day, what I'm really looking for are good human beings. And there's a lot of human beings on the planet that are not good human beings. So in that way, I am limiting the share of the labor pool that is going to be able to work here. That's one of the reasons why, and I didn't even fully understand this until I recorded the episode, but this is a great, powerful insight. This is why it's important for me to do the podcast, even though it takes too much time. So here's the insight. That's why diversity is so critical, because I'm looking for a small subset of human society that has those good qualities of the heart. And if I tried to find that subset in white males that look and think like me, that's going to be really limiting. So, there's a so. Our requirement for people with those personality traits or characters of the heart narrows the proportion of the labor pool that's going to work out for us. But diversity does the opposite. It broadens the amount of people in the labor pool that could potentially come to work here. And so for us, I think you need both, because we're super picky about the type of people that can come here. Diversity allows us it makes it easier to fill those roles because we're looking for those special type of people in a larger swath of the labor pool. And that, I think that's a really powerful insight I didn't fully appreciate until I sat down to outline and record this episode. But we are looking for special people with good qualities. And we can maybe talk about, I don't know, maybe if we'll talk about this in a PYB OTM Extra or in another episode. But I've also learned as a business owner that the qualities, the person's personality traits and their moral character, the qualities of their heart are much more important to me than their actual skills. Not that skills aren't important, but I'd much rather hire a good human being that's less skilled than a mean human being with more skill. Hands down, every time I will choose a person with a better heart and less skills. I actually have a quote. I don't know if you guys can see it, but on my wall, one of the quotes I have is, hire them for character, train them for skill. Character is critical. So that's a limitation of our model. We're looking for special humans, good human beings. Another limitation, the second, is our model doesn't work well if you want to try and grow your business without making a large investment in your people. So our whole hiring model is built on making a huge investment in folks. We invest way more in our team members than at any other survey business I have ever worked for in my 21-year career. It's probably more than that now. I don't think I get depressed. 22-year career, maybe 23. So don't try and run this model. Don't try and run this model if you're not willing to make that investment in your team members, because it isn't going to work. But that's a downside, right? That's a limitation. There's a cost to this model. We hire non-traditional folks with the right character and moral compass, we hope, and then we give them a ton of training. And there's a cost to that training. And the other reason, the third limitation to this approach that we've talked about in this episode, and it's related to that large investment, it's related to the second limitation, is retention is vitally important for the health of our business. We spend so much money training and developing our people that it really, really hurts us when someone walks out the door to take another job. So I think I spend an incredible amount of time thinking about how we retain people, and a lot of our systems here are designed to make sure people stay and to catch and fix problems before they leave. And we're not perfect about that. I told you before in one of the other podcast episodes, I think I lose one person a year. It's way too much. I wish it was 0. I think that number is going to go down partly because I'm getting better at hiring. I'm getting better at finding the right people to start. So hopefully that number will go down. But retention is vitally important. What that means is we tend to pay above market rate. Not a huge amount, but we pay 10 to 20% above market rate, especially for our part of California. We do a ton of on-the-job training and professional development. We provide people with a lot of flexibility. Almost all of my people have the ability to work from home at least part of the week. Get two or three field people that do not yet have that opportunity because they're in the field a ton. And I have my marketing coordinator and my marketing specialist and project coordinator. I ask her to be here 5 days a week because that's Miriam. She plays such a critical role. We work so closely together. But as she gets trained and we learn each other's habits and manner of working, I hope to be able to get her the ability to work from home 1 day a week as well. So we provide a lot of flexibility. The other thing, I don't want to get completely sidetracked on this, but my people don't punch time clocks. I don't time lunch breaks. I don't count their Starbucks runs. We're super flexible about letting people go in the red on their PTO. I've got a guy that likes to do things he hikes across Europe and takes 2-week cruises in the Caribbean, and we try and support that. So we provide a lot of flexibility. That's something many employers don't do. And another thing we do is we job craft. So on a fairly regular basis, we are job crafting more than I want.
I have to job craft more than I want. I wish I didn't have to job craft as much, but that's part of being flexible and retaining the folks that we've hired. We are regularly tweaking people's roles here. Not because we want to tweak them, but because they want to have their roles tweaked. So we do that. We job craft. That's all a pain in the butt, guys. Not gonna lie. And it costs money. So it costs money to find the people that are going to be a good fit here. It costs money to train them. It costs money to pay above market. It costs money to be flexible, and it costs money to job craft. So there's a price. There's a price to this hiring model. Now, my partner Brian and I believe that the costs are far outweighed by the benefits, but I'm not going to lie and tell you there isn't a cost. So those are some of the limitations or the drawbacks of our approach to hiring. All right, I am at an hour, or pretty close to an hour, and I have not finished the episode. I did this last time, too. It's because I get excited about this topic, and I try and cram too much in my outline. Here's what we're going to do. We are going to make a part 2 to this. We will talk about if you think there are some advantages to our hiring model at RH, and you want to try and emulate some of that. What can you do? How can you hire like RH? We're going to talk about how do you find non-traditionals? What do you do during the selection process? What do you do after the hire to make sure that people succeed at your non-traditionals, succeed at your organization? Then we'll talk about 3 or 4 reasons why I think our RH hiring model is successful. It's proven to be successful the last 5 years. That could change, but so far it's been successful. And then we can talk a little bit about what kind of qualities make a person a good hire at RH, field and office. Visit about that. So I think that's enough to probably fill most of it another episode. It might be a little shorter, but that's okay. So I'm going to end now. We'll do part 2 next. That will be episode 26, I think. Episode 27, we're going to go back to finding good, our series on finding good clients, and we'll talk about how to segment your market and use marketing personas. I want to do that episode for my marketing specialist, Miriam. That's why it's in the hopper. I already have it scripted, so I will record that as soon as I can, hopefully this next week. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I appreciate it. Don't forget, if you want to learn about how to use QGIS, reach out to the team at RH. They can help you do that. If you're a land surveyor or civil engineer and you want to get started, super easy. My team can help you out. And we'll catch you guys on the next episode. As we wrap up the podcast today, I want to do a couple things. I want to let you guys know where you can find the podcast. And I also want to let you know how you can support the podcast if you've enjoyed it. So let's start with that first thing. Where can you find the podcast? The podcast lives on the web at landonblake.com/PYBOTM. So if you go to my website, landonblake.com, up at the top, you'll find a menu. Go to Learn. It's the second link in the Learn menu. That'll take you right to the podcast. We have got links to download all the episodes there in MP3 format, and we also have the show notes. You can also find the podcast on YouTube, youtube.com/@PYBOTM. All of the episodes are also uploaded there. We have the podcast on Spotify, so you can find the podcast in all of those places. Second thing, how can you support the podcast? There's a few different ways you can do that. If you'd like to sponsor the podcast, reach out to me with an email, phone call, or text message. We can talk about your job opportunity for senior land surveyors, or if you have a high-quality product or service for land surveyors and mappers, we could also talk about that on the podcast. You can also subscribe to the podcast on YouTube or Spotify. Tell a friend about the podcast. Share one of your favorite episodes on social media for us. And then finally, if you'd like to make a real difference, you can go to the On Point Workshops page at Patreon. We've got a tier there, membership tier for $20 a month. You can join and support the podcast, and you get extras. We call them PYBOTM extras there. So we try and do 1 or 2 extras from each episode, video and audio, as just a little thank you to the folks that support us for $20 a month. So if you got the price of a medium pizza in your budget and you want to support the podcast, the best way to do that is on Patreon. That will help me pay for Carly. Carly is the
virtual assistant and digital marketing extraordinaire that helps me with all of the unseen back-end work on the podcast. So editing, maintaining the webpage, doing the show notes, that kind of stuff. Carly's great. I'd like to keep her around. One way you can help me do that is by becoming a subscriber or a member on Patreon. So appreciate everybody that's done that already, and I also appreciate the thank you notes I've gotten from several of you for the podcast. That makes a difference. I know everybody's busy. I appreciate you guys taking some time out of your busy schedule to send a thank you note. So please support the podcast, and we will catch you guys on the next episode. Thanks.